All right, we started. We've just gone live. And as I was getting ready to do this interview, Alex, the team sent me through a post by Trump, and I'll read it out for you. Essentially says that Maduro has been captured. I'll read out the exact post. I haven't read it all yet. The U.S. has successfully carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela and its leader, President Nicolas Maduro, who has been, along with his wife, captured and flown out of the country. This operation was done in conjunction with U.S. law enforcement. The details to follow. There will be a news conference today at 11 a.m. at Mar-a-Lago. Thank you for your attention. So everyone was talking whether this there's an amphibious attack going on and whether this is the beginning of a new war. What's your initial take? Other pieces of information that we have is that there's multiple locations that were targeted. The largest airbase, the headquarters, the defense headquarters, Ministry of Defense. We've got the various communication sites, anti-air defense systems, the Russian air defense systems that they have. And the reason we knew there's an operation and special forces in the country is because Chinook helicopters, as well as AH-1Zs and MH-16 Black Hawks, were spotted over Caracas. And now we know that the objective of these helicopters was special forces capturing Maduro and flying him out of the country. What's your initial reaction, Alex?
Well, there were no air defenses, so there was no way for Venezuela, for the military to prevent the capture of Maduro. And if I had to take a guess, I would say that this was very much along the lines of what happened in Syria. Bribes were given out, people were paid off, the air defenses were not activated. The U.S. military struck Caracas, struck Venezuela, hit whatever military bases they needed to hit, perhaps to take out whatever military forces were not on the take, were not bribed. The ones that they were didn't fire any air defense, and they grabbed Maduro. I think it's that simple. I think it's a huge, if this is indeed true, then I think this is a big win for Trump. It's terrible for Venezuela, terrible for the world, because you just can't go into a country and take the leader, right? Regime change is what we've seen going on. That's what's happened. It wasn't a decapitation strike this time around. They just captured Maduro. They captured his wife as well, and there's going to be a new government installed. I guess that would be the next step, right? But what do you have next? What comes afterwards? Are we going to have some sort of an insurgency? Are we going to have chaos and instability in Venezuela? I mean, I think that's the big question. If this is indeed true, and I don't see why not. Trump says he's going to announce everything in a press conference. So I imagine they have captured Maduro. We just can't go into a country and capture the leader. But it does look like, very much in the same way that they executed the regime change in Syria, they've done the same thing in Venezuela.
And do you say that because of the limited defenses that were put up by Venezuela and the army?
None. No air defense.
Not one
even limited
at all.
Yeah, so for me, that's very, very suspicious. And I imagine that whatever military was loyal to Maduro, that was targeted or kept distracted, occupied with the Apache helicopter strikes. So they hit whatever air bases they needed to hit, whatever military facilities they needed to hit. They struck at those. Air defenses were not activated, and they went in and grabbed Maduro. That's the way it looks.
So Maduro, after the attacks, as I was preparing for our interview, and I was just coming up with the agenda, and one of the things that I put up is the response by Venezuela. And Maduro essentially called for declared national emergency and called for the troops to be deployed. But as I was typing this out, he was already captured. It was a very, very quick operation. Yeah. What does that say about U.S. military capabilities? And then who leads the military now? And there were reports that the defense minister was killed. That was not confirmed. It doesn't seem so. A lot of people were speculating a capitulation strike where they target the leadership, as Israel did in Iran. That hasn't happened. It's more of a shock and awe. They destroyed their capabilities. What does that say about the U.S. The U.S. capabilities? But also, what can Venezuela do next? Who controls Venezuela in the meantime?
I don't know who controls Venezuela in the meantime. I think that's a good question. I imagine the U.S. controls Venezuela, right? I mean, that's the way it looks. What does it say about the U.S. military capabilities? The military capabilities? Nothing, really. doesn't tell me anything about the U.S. military capabilities. It tells me that the U.S. has excellent covert intel capabilities. It tells me that the U.S. did infiltrate the Venezuelan military, probably going months, if not years back, and they've been working on military officials, and they got to them. That's what this tells me. This tells me that the CIA and the intel officials, which we do know from various New York Times articles going back a month or two ago, that the CIA was operating in Venezuela.
Trump declared it openly.
Yeah, and then he declared it openly. So for Trump to declare it openly, we have to assume this has been happening for a long time, that the CIA has been operating in Venezuela and working on turning military officials. And it looks like they've done it. It looks like they succeeded in doing that. As far as a U.S. military, if you have no air defense, and if a certain percentage of the military officials have been paid off or bribed or whatever the scenario is, we'll find out from Trump when he gives the press conference. Then there's really not much you can say about the actual military operation. That this was a covert operation, a kidnapping of an internationally recognized leader of a country. Now you have a power vacuum, which the U.S. is going to fill. I don't know who's going to come in.
Machado, probably.
Machado, yeah. who Venezuelans despise. Is it going to be Juan Guaido, who Venezuelans despise, or is it going to be someone else? This is the problem now. U.S. regime change operations never turn out well. Never. And we see that unfolding in Syria. The same thing happened in Syria. Pretty much the same exact thing. Military officials were paid off. Assad was left isolated. Instead of the U.S. capturing Assad, perhaps because of Russia's closeness to Syria, perhaps because of the geography, Syria being close to Russia as well, they managed to extract Assad. In this instance, Venezuela is very, very far away. So
can you actually break down Syria? It's a fascinating story, because when I spoke to people that were close to the Assad regime, they said while they were trying to find out what's going on, a lot of troops were putting their weapons down. Commanders were ordering the troops to put their weapons down and withdraw, or allow the opposition forces to enter unopposed. And they said that a lot of them were paid off, and they were finding this out over time. And also AI was used to trick a lot of them, to give them fake orders to not resist the forces that were advancing. Can you break that down a bit further? Because I know you've covered it on your channel, and how that comparison would apply to what we're seeing now in Venezuela. So do you think that the US has planned to pay off a lot of these leaders over the last few months as they're preparing this operation? So when the day comes, when they press the green button to kick it off, a lot of these leaders would stand down. The air defense system, as you said, would all stand down.
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much explained it. You choke the economies of these countries, whether it's Syria or whether it's Venezuela. The military officials are not getting paid what they think they should be getting paid. The U.S. comes along and pays them more, and there you go. And that's what happened in Syria. Assad made many mistakes. We have to say this. Russia told Assad many times for example, to reconcile with Erdogan and with Turkey, even though Turkey led what was one of the leading countries in the conflict in Syria. Russia told Assad, look, you have to meet with Erdogan and you have to reconcile with Turkey. That's very important. Assad refused. Assad refused to go to the BRICS summit in Kazan, even though Russia told him, come to the BRICS summit. Yes, you're not a member of BRICS, but attend. It's important for you to go to that summit. Assad, the big mistake that he made were two. He refused Russia's consultations and Russia's mediation, especially with Erdogan and with Turkey. And the other big mistake that he made, which was a huge mistake, my understanding of this, is that he got rid of a lot of the very loyal, hardcore, battle-proven military officials that he had in place during the conflict that was going on in Syria, and he replaced them with other officials who were more loyal or more friendly to the Arab Gulf nations, because he wanted to align himself more with the Arab Gulf nations. And those officials were not loyal to his father. They were not as loyal to himself, and they were easy to turn. And that's what happened. There was no victory in some sort of a civil war or anything like that happened in Syria. Basically, it was ISIS, Al Qaeda, Al Nusra, call them what you want, that the U.S. brought in to basically walk into Damascus. Once they turned military.
When all this started, I was speaking to someone. I told him, obviously, I was very critical of U.S. intervention. I've always been critical of regime change. But when I saw the news by Trump, would you consider this? I know it's too early to say success, because what matters is what happens next. It's always the day after that really counts. Will the country go into what Syria and Libya went into, or would they prosper as Venezuela economically has been suffering for a long time? Time will tell. But are you at least impressed, or do you see that to be a partial success? It is a win for Trump, optically, in the US. But from a military perspective, a successful operation when you have no troop casualties whatsoever on the US side. Maduro captured within hours. We're still preparing for this interview before we got the news that he was captured, a couple of hours after the operation started. Would that be a successful military operation as a whole? And then let's go to the day after. What will be your prediction next? Where do you see Venezuela in a month from now? Because Venezuela's economically, because we have to also accept that Maduro is also not popular. It's hard to confirm. Is Machado popular? Is she not? Is Maduro popular? But we know Maduro is not popular. Assad was not popular when Syria fell. And Maduro was in a similar position. He had a lot of support within the military, which you said that was one of the areas targeted by the US through people being paid off.
I would say that Machado is definitely not popular. I think everyone can accept that Machado is not popular in Venezuela. Maduro, I would say it's a mixed bag. I don't think he's not popular. I think there is a large part of the population that, and maybe not even so much Maduro as Chavez and the institutions that Chavez ushered in, and Maduro being the successor of that government. Is he unpopular with certain parts of the Venezuelan, especially, let's say, the Caracas population or the elite society? Sure. The same held for Assad. Assad was popular, but he also had parts of Syria that he was unpopular with. Bringing in Machado is not the solution. Bringing in a Guaido character is not the solution, because these people are universally throughout Venezuela unpopular. So, I mean, they're not going to be the solution. What they're going to do is they're going to sell the resources of Venezuela to the West, to the United States. Machado has already said that. So is this a success from a covert intel perspective? Yeah, huge success short term for Trump, and Trump is going to milk it. He's going to play it up. We went into Venezuela.
He already just said now in a brief phone interview with the Times, just came in now as you're speaking, Trump celebrated the success of the mission to capture Maduro. Quote, a lot of good planning, a lot of great troops and great people. It was a brilliant operation, actually. As he took a lot of credit for the Iranian strikes on the nuclear facilities, which one can make a better argument that those were a failure in comparison to what we're seeing now in Venezuela. But yeah, he's taking a lot of credit for this. I think this one's a much better story for him, because he was everyone was looking at Trump, Iran, same thing. They're like, Trump, you want to be the peace president. You want to end wars, not start wars. So people were immediately quick in jumping on criticizing him when he struck Iran. But that's trying to mark the end of the war in Iran. So that didn't hurt him politically. And now in Venezuela, everyone was watching on whether the US will be dragged into another war. Well, it hasn't. It was a 2-hour strike. Maduro's out. And what happens next, time will tell. But I think Americans care less, unfortunately. Americans would care less about what happens to Venezuela next. They don't care much about where Libya's at today. They care more about whether US troops are still in Venezuela. US troops are being targeted in Venezuela. And that is not the case. So from a political perspective, this is a win. No troop casualties. Whether Venezuela prospers economically, hopefully it does, or the economy collapses even further and maybe leads to civil war, I think Americans care less about that. Until it leads to immigrants flowing into the country. That's a different story.
Well, yeah, that's a different story. Exactly. So, I mean, short term, this is a big win for Trump. He's going to take advantage of this. He's going to take his victory lap, and they got their regime change.
Where are Russia and China? Where are Russia and China?
Well, they can't really do anything, can they? Actually, China was in Venezuela just yesterday. There were Chinese officials in Venezuela just yesterday. But I mean, you know, Russia can't do anything and China can't do anything. I mean, they're so far away from Venezuela. There's really not much that they could do. And the minute you've got the top military officials, the way it looks, you have the top military officials already bribed and turning against the government. There's really nothing that Russia and China can do in this instance. What they can do, and what every country is going to be saying, is that the United States cannot be trusted. That's exactly what every country, except from the vassals of the collective West. Okay, they're going to view this as a huge win, but Russia's going to take notice of this. China's going to take notice of this, and every country is going to take note of this. Iran is going to look at this. You know, the strike against Iran hasn't ended the conflict in Iran. We're already talking about another strike in Iran, so that's also unfolding. We already have protests in Iran. We have the protests ramping up. There's already talk about another strike happening towards Iran. Netanyahu was in Mar-a-Lago just the other day, and he was selling Trump on a conflict round 2 against Iran. So that hasn't ended. My sense of Venezuela is that in the medium to long term, most likely you're going to get a lot of instability. That's not going to play in the favor of the United States. But in the short term, Trump is going to position this as a victory, and it is a victory. It was fast. It was quick. From what we're getting, no casualties, and we'll see what happens with Maduro.
That was my next question. What exactly?
I don't know. I don't know what he does with Maduro. I don't know. Does he parade him around? Do they put him on trial? I mean, this is. I'm not a lawyer, so I can't say what this means legally, international law, how they're going to.
No, I think we're past. I think we're past.
But I mean,
international
well, we're past. But I mean, there is. Well, look, the international rules-based order, right? Isn't that what the U.S. always lectures everybody about? International law and the rules-based order. Well, you just went into a country and you kidnapped the internationally recognized leader of that country. A couple of days ago, there were drone strikes targeting Putin, allegedly drone strikes targeting Putin. Okay, but you know, you can't go after leaders, right? Isn't that what we've been told? You can't go decapitate.
These are the red lines. Even when Iran,
these are the red lines. And
Israel was striking Iran.
Yeah. No matter how much you hate them, no matter how much you despise them, there are certain rules to war or to conflict, and there are certain international rules. You just can't go in there and grab the leader of another country. But we're dealing with the United States, and so, you know, there are no rules.
We're kind of seeing a new world order with the Monroe Doctrine being active again, having all these countries, a multipolar world where each country has their sphere of influence. China trying to increase their influence in the South China Sea, and obviously reuniting with Taiwan. We're seeing Russia and what we're seeing in Ukraine, and the US now is focusing more on Latin America. But no one would have expected that to include a military strike on Venezuela. What does that mean for Cuba and Colombia and the rest of the region?
Well, Cuba's next. I mean, Cuba's reliant on Venezuela for the oil. So Cuba's next. Is going to put the squeeze on Cuba, which is exactly what Rubio was aiming for. I mean, we got to remember that a lot of this is being pushed. My guess is being pushed by Rubio. And Rubio's ultimate goal may not be so much Venezuela, though he does have it in for Venezuela and for Maduro. But Rubio's ultimate goal is Cuba. So now Cuba's going to get squeezed. Once again, Russia has offered Cuba oil at a discount, but I believe Venezuela was getting the oil to Cuba free. So, I mean, this is going to put Cuba in a very difficult position. You know, I just want to comment on what you said about the international rules-based order and how everything is changing, spheres of influence. I think this is a lot more problematic than a lot of people are believing it is, because, you know, we're seeing oil tankers attacked, we're seeing oil tankers seized, we're seeing leaders kidnapped, we're seeing decapitation strikes on officials. We're seeing decapitation strikes on scientists. We're entering a very dangerous world right now. This is not good. This is not a good development. I understand the argument for Venezuela. They're going to have freedom and democracy now. I know how this is all going to be spun. Maybe they will. Maybe they will have freedom. Maybe they will have democracy. Maybe the oil industry is going to boom. I think you have to be pretty naive to believe that's going to happen, but it might. The real story here is that we are entering a world of no rules, of chaos, of big powers. If they want to, they can pretty much do as they wish. At least the United States is definitely doing as they wish. And so this is going to be very problematic. It's going to be problematic for trade,
and we've got
for the economy, for finance.
We have China upping the pressure on Taiwan as well. On a positive note, at least there's dialogue between the US and even Macron and Russia. At least we're close to the never to peace. I know we're still not close to it. And I think we both agree that last 10%, as Zelensky said, which is the territory and defense guarantees, especially when it comes to territory, we're far from reaching an agreement there, but we're in a very different position when it comes to that war than a year ago. And the war in Gaza, the strikes are ongoing. Lebanon strikes are ongoing. Syria is still not stable, but at least the war in Gaza officially is ended. So there's at least developments, positive developments on these two fronts. But at the same time, it comes at, increasing tensions in China and Taiwan with I think the largest drills ever that just concluded a couple of days ago. And Japan saying they'll come to Taiwan's defense if China attacks Taiwan. And obviously we've got the decapitation strike now, the shock and awe attack on Venezuela and the capture of their leader and their kidnapping.
I mean, capture the kidnapping. They kidnapped the guy. Yeah.
The defense minister just put out a statement, by the way. Would love to get your thoughts on it. We're talking about that power vacuum. So he has survived the attack and he's condemning the strikes. The Venezuelan people have been subjected to the most criminal military aggression by the government of the US. They have desecrated our sacred soil in Caracas and the state of Miranda and listed the places that were attacked. We issue the strongest denunciation before the international community for the flagrant violation of the United Nations Charter and international law that we're just talking about right now. Could we see someone within the military? Because if Maduro is no longer there, we're talking about Machado coming in power, which you said is not popular. But the military still has control of Venezuelan politics. Can't we just have a more hardline person within the military come into power, someone like the defense minister, which is speaking in support of Maduro and criticizing the US? Because Maduro's out, the military is still in control, which makes it, if that's the case, it puts the American situation, or Venezuela's situation, in a very precarious place. Because when there's a power vacuum, the military has control and the military is loyal to Maduro and Machado's not popular, it seems like a recipe for internal power struggles that could lead to a civil war.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know what the succession plan was for Maduro, for Venezuela. I don't know what they have in place if Maduro is taken out, if he's gone. Who do they have in place to replace him? How loyal are these people to the state? We don't know. We're going to find out, though. We're going to now find out, and we got to see the people's reaction to all of this as well. What are the Venezuelans going to think? Are they going to rally behind the flag, or are they going to just accept what's going on?
Talking about the people rallying behind the flag, I know this is about Venezuela, but we are seeing developments since New Year's Eve across the world. We're seeing the protests in Iran as well. Netanyahu was on New Year's Eve with Trump, allegedly talking about a second strike on Iran. What do you expect to see there? Could that embolden U.S. intervention? They've had great success in Venezuela. Trump believes that he could do the same thing in Iran, and we could see a similar process, a similar plan implemented for Iran as well, especially with people on the streets and the regime under such pressure. We got reports that the banks were ordered by the regime to continue operations despite the similar to the 2008 crisis where liquidity is drying up in Iran. Could we see the same thing happen in Iran?
Regime change is definitely on the table in Iran, without a doubt. How they're going to do it, no one expected this outcome in Venezuela. So, I mean, the main message for the government in Iran is take notice of what's happened in Venezuela. Take notice at what happened in Novgorod towards Russia. Countries around the world need to see what's going on, and they need to realize that the world we live in today, there are no rules, especially when it comes to the great powers, especially when it comes to the way Trump in the United States is operating. Decapitation strikes are definitely on the table. Kidnapping military leaders is on the table. Covert operations, without a doubt, is the preferred policy of Trump.
Striking a peace delegation as well in Qatar. Don't forget that.
Yeah, striking a peace delegation, negotiating a peace deal, and then at the same time striking those negotiators, hitting scientists, killing scientists and their families. I mean, all of these things now are on the table. There are no rules to engagement. All of that is over and done. There are countries that are still abiding by these rules of engagement. But as far as the Trump administration goes, there are no rules. They will do whatever they need to do to win and to prevent the multipolar world from coming into shape. I think this is more than just spheres of influence. I mean, this is about preventing BRICS, but mainly China, from taking the position of the United States.
Do you think Putin, you've mentioned this a couple of times, do you think he was targeted by Ukraine? Because we have Putin mentioned to Trump on the call that his residence was attacked. Mm-hmm. Trump initially was upset by the attack, and then the CIA put out a report that the target was not Putin's residence. It was a military base in that same region that was targeted before by Ukraine. And most recently, we have a report that Russian delegation met the US delegation, and gave them proof, I think, data from the drones to the American delegation, proving that the target was Putin's residence. Do you think it was Putin's residence? What do you think the goal was behind it?
Well, the New York Times and the CIA has pretty much admitted that they were targeting Putin, didn't they? Sure, they did. The New York Times put out an article, and they said that the CIA told Trump that they were sending drones into the region of Novgorod, but they were targeting a different facility. I mean, that's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. So the New York Times is telling, through the CIA, they're telling us that, yeah, there were drones that were launched into that region, but we weren't targeting Putin's residence. We were targeting some other places across the street. That's absurd. Putin is not, whatever people think of Putin, he's no fool. There is no chance that he would get on a phone call with Trump and tell Trump that they were targeting me, knowing that the United States would absolutely know if they were targeting Putin or not. Why would he put himself in that kind of position? He wouldn't. Without a doubt, those drones, in my opinion, those drones were heading towards Putin. We also have the New York Times telling us that it is the CIA that is behind the drone attacks on oil refineries and on oil tankers. That also came out.
Giving the targets for the Ukrainians.
Well, the targets, okay. Giving the targets, coordinating, call it whatever we want. We go back to what you said and what I said. As the United States is negotiating with Russia, as they're negotiating and they're the neutral mediator in all of this, they're the ones that are coordinating the strikes on oil tankers, refineries, and other facilities, energy facilities, as they're negotiating with Russia. That was the New York. This is not me. This is what the New York Times is reporting, and the CIA is giving this information to the New York Times for a reason, because they want this out there. They want to come out of the shadows. Why is Budanov now in charge in Ukraine? Why is Zelensky been sidelined? Zelensky and Budanov hate each other, but Budanov is now going to be the chief of staff. Budanov is now running the show. Budanov is a product of the CIA. We also know that from a New York Times article that they published 2-3 years ago, where they said that they found Budanov in 2015-16. They groomed him to take over the intel services in Ukraine. He's a product of the CIA, and now he is in the position to run everything in Ukraine. So, I mean, the intel agencies, at least with the case of Putin, the CIA and the U.S. intel agencies, they're very much behind a lot of the strikes into Russia and against Russia, and also against Russia's interests, and also China's interests, because we're talking about oil tankers that also were operating under Chinese flags or Chinese connected flags, transporting oil to China. So I mean, we're heading into a dirty war. We're heading into a covert asymmetric warfare between the great powers.
What does it mean if Budanov is in power in Ukraine? First, could he authorize an attack like the one we saw on allegedly on Putin's residence without Zelensky's okay? And for someone that's been targeted by Russia on multiple occasions, and who's also said he's targeted Putin on multiple occasions in assassination attempts, so him and Putin hate each other. Budanov's wife has been the subject of a poison attack, I think. What does that say for where the war is heading? Because, you know, you were critical of Zelensky not wanting peace and sabotaging the peace negotiations in Istanbul. But if you put someone like Budanov, who's one would say more hardline than Zelensky, and not wanting to give up territory, doesn't that put the peace negotiations in a pretty tough position? And when you say he's a product of the CIA, I know early on
that's not me saying it. That's the CIA. That's the New York Times. I just want to be clear. That's the New York Times that has reported on this.
How much influence do you think they have over Budanov?
Well, the New York Times, according to their reporting, once again in an article, I believe the article is called "Spy Games," and it talks specifically. It was 3 years ago, 2-3 years ago. Talks specifically how in 2015, 2016, the CIA noticed Budanov, and they trained him and groomed him to take over the intel services, the intel agencies in Ukraine. This is basically a summary of what the New York Times reported. So it's not me saying this about Budanov. This is the New York Times reporting that Budanov is without a doubt the front man, the man for the CIA when it comes to Ukraine. So I mean,
he's more hardline than Zelensky. So if there is a rift between him and Zelensky,
he's hardline. He's also realistic. You know, he's not some clown actor like Zelensky is. You know, at least Budanov has understood, and he has openly said that the war is lost, that Ukraine is not going to win this war. He is much more realistic, but he says that knowing that it's time to move to an asymmetric, covert type of war with Russia, an insurgency type of war, and that's what he's in place to do. This is stuff that Zelensky can't do. This is stuff that Zelensky doesn't understand. Zelensky's a bag man. He goes around the world, and because he's an actor, and much of the collective West is enamored, and they're completely taken in by the actor in Kiev, the Churchill of our generation. You know, they pour money into Zelensky's bag. That's Zelensky. Now with Budanov, you're going to have a guy who's going to be acting on behalf of the CIA, so that we can move this war to some sort of an asymmetric conflict. That's the way I look at the news over the past 3-4 days.
Yeah, and another thing that everyone's covering, all eyes are on, is the military drills again by China around Taiwan, especially after Japan's comments. When you have something like this happen in Venezuela, it just makes it much harder to say to a country like China, don't invade Taiwan, which was part of China, which most countries say is part of China. What would you see happen there? So we've got Russia invaded Ukraine, and then you've got now the US conducted a military operation in Venezuela. One would say invaded for a day Venezuela and captured their leader. China will be looking at all this, and China is a non-interventionist country, and saying, you know, none of you are in a position, especially the US, are not in a position to tell us now not to invade and capture what is part of our country. Venezuela is a sovereign country, and you guys did what you wanted there. Taiwan is part of China, was part of China. So we will take it by force if we cannot politically. And especially now that not only Japan's prime minister's comments saying they'll defend Taiwan if China attacks it, but also the new defense deal the US did with Taiwan. I think it was $8 billion military package with Taiwan, the largest ever, to continue to strengthen Taiwan's military. Things don't look too good there. And everyone was talking about that invasion coming in decades from now, maybe 20 years, 25 years, 2050. It seems that the time is ripe now for China to do what it's always said they will do.
Well, China had the military drills in response to the U.S.'s second military package to Taiwan. So this is the second big package that Trump has sent to Taiwan, while at the same time, the United States officially, you can go to the State Department website, officially recognizes Taiwan as part of China. This is the official position of the United States when it comes to Taiwan and China. But at the same time, they're pouring in more and more weapons into Taiwan. China would prefer a unification that was peaceful and evolutionary, not more natural. This is what they would prefer: diplomacy to work towards.
They've said that time and time again.
They've said that time and time again. I think they've shown it time and time again. But all these countries, they need to take notice of the way Trump is running his foreign policy. It is a foreign policy of chaos, a foreign policy of piracy, of trickery. I've said this many times. Trump's foreign policy is a foreign policy of trickery. This is what Trump likes to do. This is what his foreign policy is doing. Countries need to take notice of this. Russia and Putin have taken a position where the United States is the neutral mediator, and it's all the UK and the EU's fault. It's nonsense. The UK and the EU can't make any decisions without the United States. They have no sovereignty, and everyone knows this. So, I mean, there's all kinds of theater that's playing out here that they're presenting us with. But the bottom line is that the big powers, there are no rules anymore. Whether Russia and China, which I think gets to the heart of your question, whether Russia and China are going to exercise the no rules world that we're living in, I think time will tell. But the United States is definitely exercising the no rules world we live in. There are no rules. There's no UN. There's no international law. There's none of that stuff anymore. And it's not a capture. It's a kidnapping. They kidnapped the leader of a country. Hate Maduro all you want. I'm not a fan of, I'm not even that. I'm not invested in Venezuela one bit. I'm living far away from Venezuela. But you went into a country and you kidnapped the internationally recognized leader of that country. You kidnapped the guy and his wife.
Last thing I want to cover here, and we're talking about the new international rules order, and another thing that's happening in the last few days, and a lot of people talking about Mossad and US fingerprints on them, is the protests that are happening in Iran. It's been years they haven't had protests to this size. There's massive inflation. The economy's been hit hard after the war, and the Prince Pahlavi is very vocal about conducting regime change in Iran. Everyone was talking about it happening throughout the war, as part of the war. Israel was very open about calling for Iranians to go to the streets and support to support the movement. But now we've got the US. I think Trump put out a statement yesterday or the day before that the US will support protesters. I'm going to paraphrase what he said, but we'll support protesters. Exactly, locked and loaded. And they'll support protesters if they were targeted by the military, by the Iranian regime. And we've got Israel telling people still to go on the streets. And we saw Mossad's capabilities of having assets on the ground in Iran in that 12-day war. One would be naive to say that the assets are still not active in Iran. What do you make of the protests that are happening there? And as I said earlier, the US could be emboldened by the success in Venezuela, and the fact that Netanyahu was just in Mar-a-Lago a couple of days ago on New Year's Eve. What do you expect to happen there?
Once again, I don't know how loyal the military is in Iran, the Republican Guard. I don't know. Can they get paid off? Can they be turned? I think not. But I didn't think that this would happen to Maduro either. I mean, there were reports that the military was very loyal to him and very much supportive of him. I don't want to say that all the military has been turned in Venezuela, but obviously the key people in the key position were able to back down. That's the way it looks. Iran, we're gonna have to wait and see what happens there. But regime change is on the table. There's no doubt about that. And the Trump administration would like to execute that regime change in much the same way that they executed the regime change in Syria, that well, Biden, the U.S. executed the regime change in Syria, the way they're executing the regime change in Venezuela. They would like to do the same in Iran if they can. A conflict in Iran, a conventional war in Iran, obviously would be extremely difficult for the United States to undertake. So, this is their preferred way of getting the current regime out of power and getting a new one that's U.S. friendly into power. Everything though is focused on chipping away at the multipolar world and at BRICS. You're taking pieces off the chessboard. That's what they're doing, and Venezuela is not an important piece for the core of BRICS, but for the periphery of BRICS related, because Venezuela wasn't a part of BRICS, but it was connected to China, to Russia, to the core members of BRICS. You take them out of the picture. You then look at Cuba. We had strikes against Nigeria as well. Let's not forget that Nigeria is a partner country of BRICS. A lot of oil in Nigeria as well. Iran is a member of BRICS now. You have a war between the UAE and Saudi Arabia, which is escalating over Yemen. The UAE is friendly to the US, but the UAE is also a member of BRICS. And then, of course, you have Taiwan and everything else. So, I mean, the big picture, a lot of this is about energy resources and oil, but it's all connected. And a big part of this is the hegemon doing everything it can to prevent the rise of the new multipolar world led by China.
Chipping away at China's allies. You've got Venezuela, you've got Iran. Iran is going to be in a very difficult position right now, especially with the fall of Assad and now the fall of Maduro. Talking about the fall of Maduro, by the way, Alex, we're talking about the power vacuum. It just came in the news now. Vladimir Padrino Lopez, the defense minister that survived the attack, who were talking about his speech, he's now the de facto leader of the country. That just came in now. We're waiting for a speech to come in.
Well,
so we don't know his position and what his position will be. He's obviously he was loyal to Maduro. Loyalties do change. Do you think it was part of the plan to have him step in as leader? The US would have thought that through. Who's going to be, because Machado can't be the leader in hours or in a day. There must be a process before they get either Machado or some hopefully democratically elected leader in power. Do you think there'd be some sort of deal between the defense minister and the US? It was all planned in advance?
Yeah, well, Machado would not have been democratically elected, as much as Al-Jilani was not democratically elected. People forget Al-Jilani in Syria is not democratically elected at all either. But perhaps they tried to take out Maduro's inner circle. I have read reports saying that they did successfully, some people, but other people they were not able to decapitate within the Maduro administration. The defense minister, he's alive, and now he's the leader of Venezuela. Will he make a deal with the Trump administration? Will he resist? I think that's the big question. We had a deal with Venezuela. The United States had a deal with Venezuela through Richard Grenell. Trump also spoke to Maduro. Allegedly, Maduro was ready to compromise to leave Venezuela in a year or two's time. He was also ready to give up much of Venezuela's resources to the big energy companies in the United States, but that wasn't enough for Trump. He wanted Maduro gone. He wanted Maduro gone without any amnesty. The reports were that Maduro was ready to leave in a year or two,
as long
as he was also given amnesty.
Why not do that? Why not? If he was ready to leave and he initially offered the US access to Venezuelan oil. If this was about oil, then wouldn't that have solved the issue? Now, some would say that's a temporary solution. Maduro being in power is still seen as a threat to the US and US interests. So if Maduro accepted to step down and requested amnesty, what would be your understanding of why the US would not accept him voluntarily leaving the country and giving a world leader amnesty? Again, I'm not a fan of Maduro whatsoever. But if that is one way of being able to achieve regime change, voluntary regime change, and Maduro handing the torch to someone else, while Venezuela becoming more friendly to the US, why not do that? What is the reason they would want to do it militarily? What's the benefit that they wouldn't get? More control over who is in power? More control over Venezuelan interests?
I imagine there's a political component for Trump. to compromise with Maduro, perhaps would not have been a good look for Trump, especially in the eyes of say the hardcore Republican lawmakers, or both sides of the aisle. The neocons would probably not have looked favorably at Trump compromising with Maduro. Perhaps there was a belief in the United States that you cannot give Maduro 1 or 2 years. He's bluffing, so let's not give him 1 or 2 years. Perhaps the Trump administration wants to get their people in there right away. Maybe they want to deliver a humiliation to China by removing Maduro, or put the world on notice by kidnapping Maduro or decapitating Maduro. I think there's probably a lot of components in there. There's definitely an oil aspect to all of this. I mean, there's no doubt about it that a lot of this is about oil, but it's not just about oil. There's a lot of factors that are going into what's happening in Venezuela. Let's not forget that Greenland is also on the table. I mean, Trump is waging a covert, if not an overt, asymmetric conflict against China. That's what I believe is really happening.
As you said, but Alex, don't forget that you said the Chinese envoy was in Venezuela the day before the attack. I'm just checking now, exactly the day before, hours before the US missile struck Venezuela. So not just the day before, could have been the same day, hours before the missile struck the country, and Maduro was taken out, was kidnapped. And they were discussing bilateral ties, but there's been reports that the talks are about safeguarding Chinese interests amid rising US pressure. So this is seeming more and more about, because Maduro could give access to the US to the Venezuelan oil, but if China has investments in the region, Maduro can't just kick China out.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Maybe to be able to get China out of Venezuela, and China's got their paws everywhere in the country. Venezuela's heavily indebted to China. I think they've defaulted on a debt to China not long ago. I could be wrong on that, so fact check me. It makes the military operation, from a practical perspective, when it comes to US interests, make a bit more sense, because you've got to, it takes more than just voluntarily having a leader step down to kick another country and their investments out of a country completely. China's investments in Venezuela. We've got
China's gone. China's gone now. If Trump gets his leader in place in Venezuela, it could be the defense minister too. They may talk to the defense minister and they may say, "Look, we want a smooth transition now that we got Maduro." And the defense minister may fold. I don't know. Maybe he may resist. I don't know this guy, but China's out of Venezuela now. This is a big defeat for, if everything is as is being reported. We have to wait and see. But if everything is as is being reported, then China's gone from Venezuela.
Well, we've talked about what happens to Maduro. Mike Lee put out a post, just got off the phone with Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He informed me that Nicolas Maduro has been arrested by US personnel to stand trial on criminal charges in the United States. Yeah. And that the kinetic action we saw tonight was deployed to protect and defend those executing the arrest warrant. This action, so we're seeing how it's being portrayed to the world. This action likely falls within the president's inherent authority under Article 2 of the Constitution to protect US personnel from an actual or imminent attack. So the way this is being framed is that US personnel are executing an arrest warrant against Maduro, and that the military strike was made to protect those personnel to be able to arrest the alleged criminal. That's how they're portraying it.
A very successful covert operation. Very successful. Let's not forget Pam Bondi putting out that bizarre video about 3 months ago, where she said there's going to be a 50 million bounty on Maduro's head for being the leader of a drug cartel. Remember that $50 million for the capture of Maduro? This was all put in place many, many months ago. The last piece of the puzzle was getting, in my opinion, the right parts of the military to stand down in Venezuela, so that this operation could unfold in the speed that it did, without any resistance from the Venezuelan military or the air defense. And it looks like they accomplished that goal. They got certain parts to turn away from their support of Maduro.
One of the theories is that Maduro did this in conjunction with the US. So we've got Sky News journalist David Rhodes. He claimed that, quote, members of the Venezuelan opposition contacted Maduro's parent news organization, telling it that the opposition leaders said that Maduro accepted a surrender deal from the US. So essentially, they're saying that Maduro was not taken against his will. Now, there's another theory people are talking about. This is that this was all done in coordination with Maduro, but the reason that the strike were carried out is to really obfuscate the fact that he, if he accepts to leave the country and accepts an amnesty from the US, that would be seen as betrayal from Venezuelan. So the way he coordinated it with the US is that, hey, you strike these targets, limited casualties on the Venezuelan side, which I find it hard to believe when the defense minister was in one of the premises that was targeted, and then you can come and capture me. For me, that sounds a bit far-fetched, but would love to get your thoughts on it.
Well, he's getting arrested. He's going to get arrested and put on trial, according to the statement from Rubio. So why would he agree to that? I mean, maybe this is true, but to me, it sounds very, very complicated. Maduro could have left at any time. He would have received amnesty from Russia or from China. I mean, they may have not been happy to grant, Maduro amnesty, but they would have granted him amnesty if he really wanted it. If he really wanted to leave the country, Maduro could have left the country.
Yeah. And I find this theory a bit hard to believe as well, because remember, the defense minister survived a strike on the headquarters. So for them to strike the headquarters, the defense headquarters, where the defense minister was present, he's now the de facto leader, according to reports. It just makes that theory that this was done in coordination between Maduro and the US, just a bit hard to believe.
Rubio's post pretty much debunks that theory by saying that Maduro is going to stand trial in the United States.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that pretty much means that they're gonna trot him around and make an example of him.
Exactly.
Yeah, like they did Saddam. Exactly like they did to Saddam. I mean, I'm not gonna say they're gonna execute him like they executed Saddam, but who knows? Maybe they get their people in power in Venezuela, and they send him back to Venezuela, and then the new Venezuelan government does to him what they did to Saddam. I mean, that's also possible. We don't know how all of this is going to play out, but for Rubio to put out that post and say that he's going to stand trial, he's been arrested, he's going to stand trial. I mean, you can't come back in a week's time and then say, you know what, we let Maduro go to China. I mean, you can't say that. He's in custody in the U.S.
You know what's crazy is that the vice president is saying that they cannot locate Maduro and there's no proof of life either. So the vice president is asking for proof of life from the US for their leader. It's just crazy to wake up to that news. It's an insane world that we live in.
Yeah, I mean, it was, once again, I didn't expect this outcome, but, it falls very much in line with the Trump administration's foreign policy. I've been saying for the better part of a year since Trump came into power, since he was elected, it is a foreign policy based on trickery. Good or bad, in the U.S.'s interest or not in the U.S.'s interest, in the interest of the globalists, in the interest of whoever, whatever you want to call it, the policy that Trump is instituting in the United States, their foreign policy is one based on trickery. Whether it's Russia,
would you say trickery or unpredictability? Trickery,
unpredictability. They trick people. They're tricking everybody. They're tricking us. They're tricking me. They're tricking you. They're tricking everybody. China, Russia. I don't know if China and Russia are on to what's happening.
And I want to play this footage before we end. Yeah. As I was watching, it's just hard to imagine this was hours before the attack. You've got the leader of a country meeting a Chinese delegation. Who would have expected, look how normal he's acting, just having a normal day. Who would have expected hours after this, where he's meeting a Chinese delegation, we can stop the video now, you'd be in US custody. And the last thing I'd say is Secretary of State Marco Rubio just put out a statement, according to Senator Mike Lee. He anticipates no further action in Venezuela now that Maduro is in US custody. Yeah. Is the military operation in Venezuela over? Could that be the silver lining out of what we just see now? The end of because there were a lot of fears about a war starting in Venezuela and troops being in Venezuela. I'm not talking about special ops, members of the special ops team capturing the leader, but I'm talking about an amphibious invasion into the country to be able to capture Maduro and capture the infrastructure and the leaders. And that seems to be unnecessary. It was a very quick, swift, successful strike. Could we at least see finally some peace in Venezuela now? Some
I
silver
hope
lining.
so, but I think the war is just beginning now in Venezuela. I would say everything's beginning now. I mean, maybe it'll take a few months for all the dust to settle in this specific operation. But I think going forward, you're going to see a lot of instability. At least that's how all of the regime change operations have played out for the United States.
I said that recently as Venezuela strikes began and everyone's talking about regime change. I started looking at regime change operations by the US since World War II. Other than the ones right after World War II, everything afterwards, 70s, 80s, 90s, including in the 2000s in the Middle East, almost none of it was successful. And that's if you determine success by the US interests being advanced and the country not falling into civil war or economic turmoil, to tick those two boxes, I struggled to find any. There was like one or two from many decades ago, very small regime change operations that did well. But hopefully Venezuela ends up being as part of that minority, even though I'm, like you, not that hopeful.
Yeah, I'm not that hopeful. The short-term success for Trump is there. Once again, an amazing, well-executed covert operation along the same lines as Syria. But take a look at Syria today. I think that's what's most likely in store for Venezuela, but maybe it's not. Maybe they do get a leader that can keep the country united and keep the country together and hopefully prosperous. But that's going to be, without a doubt, the exception to all the regime changes that have taken place over the past 30, 40 years.
Agree. Alex, absolute pleasure. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mario. Take care.